One of the key things that stood out for me when I was calling people who had retired or left the military ahead of me a few years, one person stated to me, leave when there's applause. And it's very simple, but it's loaded.
Welcome to VCEO Magazine, where veterans lead the way. I'm Jay Hernandez, and today my guest is Staci Reidinger. Staci is the former 1st Marine Expeditionary Force Deputy Director for Public Affairs, former the UPS Store Marketing and Communications Executive, former President of HomeAid San Diego, and the current Co-Executive Director for Cause San Diego, as well as a Public Relations Consultant. Staci, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, what's so important about VCEO Magazine is this is the resource for people to really discuss about that transition from active duty military service into civilian life. So in 6 words or fewer, could you describe your transition from the military to civilian life?
I've been thinking about this, and I think the big thing that I would kind of reflect on is that you really have to discover your identity outside of uniform. And that has been pretty much the biggest thing that I've noted. I just hit my 6 years since retiring from the Marine Corps. So yeah, we can talk about that today.
Discovering your identity outside of the uniform. Now that's a pretty big one, and one that I can say personally I felt with that when I made that transition from the military. So discovering your identity, I think let's first jump into the details of your experience. So in that first year, you've written previously about the first 365 days outside of the military. So how did that help you discover your identity outside of the military?
So I wrote that about a year after I had retired, and was around this time of year, actually in November. And I think I was hitting that time where I was thinking about the Marine Corps birthday. I was currently working as an executive with the UPS store at the time. And there were things that I just couldn't realize until I was outside of uniform. I joined at 17, done that for 24 years of my life. So yeah, some of the reflections that came about was that I went into a civilian sector senior leadership position. It felt nice to be at that level, but it was so different. It was very different. And I was surrounded by the majority of people who knew nothing about the military, had no background in it. And so I had to kind of learn my way through, and I think that they helped me kind of assimilate, I guess you can say. But it was a bumpy road. It was difficult. I felt like there were things I wanted to lean on from my military experience, and I had to figure out ways to share that in a translatable way for them so that they could understand it and see the value in it. So yeah, I mean, everybody's transition's different, but so that's one of the things I learned. And then also just understanding about leadership, strong, positive, and or negative leadership, that it exists everywhere. Those are things that, not that I didn't think that that was true, but the reality settled in for me to
Yeah.
see that. And understanding also that the level of camaraderie was very different from what I experienced from joining as a PFC in the Marine Corps all the way up to retiring as a major. There was always that sense of community and tight-knit family feel. And I just felt that wasn't able to be replicated in the civilian sector position, even though I did have a pretty large department that I worked within, and had peers as well as those that worked under on my staff. It's not like we're going to wake up at 6:30 in the morning and go play, ultimate football on the beach, and then, we're going out in the field for 30 days. Those things just, even though we call them the big suck, they actually are the things that bond us, that we have. So
I've heard that one a lot. I've heard about that sense of camaraderie being different. I've also heard people talk about that there's this level of isolation they feel when they first leave the military, and I think you've also talked about that as well. So how would you describe that level of isolation, and how that's a pretty common thing for a lot of veterans to feel?
yeah, so I'm stationed here. I'm still in San Diego to this day, but I'm stationed here in one of the largest military communities in San Diego. Yet after I picked up my DD-214 and I was on terminal leave, waiting for that final retirement time frame, instantly, it was almost like being on the freeway going 85 miles an hour, and then all of a sudden you pulled off and now you're on a country road and things are slower and you're not seeing as many people. I felt that when I left, with everything I had done, I just had this high level of confidence on my shoulders, and I felt invincible. And as time drew on, I realized that um, part of that strength and that confidence came from the team that surrounded me, and that me on my own, I wasn't operating, at least for myself, I didn't feel like I was able to handle things the same way. So that was part of it. And then also it kind of like felt like leaving like like a sports team. Like you're not on the field anymore, you're not in the locker room, you're not out doing all the hard work together. So even though you're still a Marine veteran, it doesn't feel the same as being in the game. So that's taken some time to adjust. And I found my way by connecting with military service organizations and those that have served, and then me mentoring active duty military and helping them to figure out what to do next after they leave military.
That's a really good point, is trying to find those subsets of military communities and veteran communities afterwards. I know for my own personal experience, when I first separated, my first, I would say I had two transitions. My first one was really, I would say, the easier one, because I remained really close to a lot of the military community around me. But it was that second one when I moved states where it suddenly became more difficult for me. But I was able to rebuild it over time, finding the different communities where they were, whether it was within my work center or just in volunteering. I was able to find some that way as well. So while we're on the questions of that initial military transition, though, there's different theories I've heard on how long a veteran or a service member should start planning their separation or retirement from the military. So in your experience, when do you think that planning should really start?
I don't think there's a cookie cutter answer to that. I think it has to do with how long you've been in service, how long you've been in the military. Are you walking out with, a 401k, which is the newer program, or do you have a traditional pension, which many of us have been able to leave with? So those all, I think, lean into different decisions. But I think the biggest thing is it's not like a last minute thing. I think that you should allow yourself to flow in between and thinking about those things throughout your career, whether you're there for 4 years, 14 years, 30 years. Allow yourself to look out and say, okay, if I were out of uniform tomorrow, what skills do I have? What interests and passions do I have? So that it doesn't feel so abrupt. I think what happens is sometimes, and this isn't a luxury everyone has. Some people are deployed all the way up until the time they leave. And I remember having Marines that had that, and it felt horrible to know that I needed to quickly send them to transition classes, and then they would be getting out of the military without any pension. They're younger Marines. So I think it should be something that we do a better job of in the military as leadership, to encourage them to have connections outside of the military. I think that's really huge that you do it. Now, when you're edging closer to the end, regardless of whether it's deployment or you're at a duty station where you have time, I think you should start going to those transition classes as soon as you can. A year out, sometimes I know you can even go before that, even before you tell the military that you are going to actually retire or not commit to another contract. But it's good to get in there early so you can take those notes, bring your spouse if you're married. That was so helpful to have another person to be listening in to see how things are going. And remember, those transition classes are available to you throughout the rest of your life as a veteran. They're not just a one-time class. I don't think people realize that. And it doesn't have to be at the same place. So for me, I went here to Marine Corps Station Miramar in San Diego, which is closer to where I live in Poway. But I went back a second time just to get a little more granularity on things having to do with how to really translate what I did in the military over, as well as there were other things about benefits I wanted to hear again and understand. So those are just some key pieces to do it, but just don't wait till the end, because oftentimes that lack of planning can just throw you into further spiral of feeling like this is a big change for me, and it can make it harder.
Just pointing out the fact that even after someone gets out, if they have served, those resources are still available to them. I think what will happen sometimes is people will get out and say, oh, I missed doing that, or I didn't have enough time to do it. And now I'll never get that opportunity to get that resource again, but it's still there.
Yes, and they can go to any military branch of service transition program anywhere where it's offered around the world. So they do these in the US, they do them in other countries. So regardless of where you end up, if you're stuck and you're like, hey, I kind of want to get back in there. And even if you just want to go because you want to be back around some active duty for a bit and kind of go through a little bit of a meld there, that might motivate you if you're kind of in a, kind of get stuck. But it's a valuable thing. I think that when you go through the transition training, there's so much that they go over. I think people forget that you don't have to just expect to get it all once. You can, go back again.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes that just makes it easier too for like the different points in life. Maybe we're real busy at one area, but later on there's another opportunity to do it.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, next I'm going to jump into mentorship. Staci, you were really big into mentorship. I've seen you speak at public conferences before. I've had peers who I know who have reached out to you about mentorship on their own military transition. So I wanted to ask you some questions about that, the importance of mentorship. And really, I've got two main questions for it. When people reach out to you for mentorship, what are like the biggest things that you try to bring to their attention? And then the second question we'll jump to is, what mentors did you have who gave you advice that still stick with you to this day?
So I do mentoring both of college students. I teach at San Diego State University right now. So, and even prior to that, there's a lot of college students moving into the job force in public relations, marketing, communication. So there's that whole piece there. And then there's those that are active duty military, or they've just left the military, that reach out. And I guess some of the biggest things that I see that I do for them is just connect them to others in my network. If those are people that they want to connect to, whether it be for a job, career, or community engagement. I just had a call last week with a 30-year Navy enlistee, and she's about to put in for papers to retire next year, and she's just totally like trying to figure things out. So our conversation geared towards how can she be purposeful after service, because it is a piece where sometimes people that may be walking out with a pension and they're looking to slow down a little bit, and maybe they don't want to hold the same schedule that they did when they were on active duty, which is totally understandable. So I think that that's been it. And then the other thing is them wondering, is it time to stay or go? And that's why I refer them to my 365 article I wrote. It's on my LinkedIn. I'm like, go read that first, because I really do think that there are opportunities for you to explore whether you're ready or not ahead of time, so that you don't do buyer's remorse, right? You make that decision and then you go and they're like, oh man, I thought this was going to be what I wanted. So I just think that there's opportunities. Like the military now has things like work with industry, where there's chance opportunities where you can get selected to go and work for a civilian company for 6 to 12 months. And you get to experience that and see if that's something that is doable for you. And then obviously you bring that back to your active duty time, and it leads into helping to be more effective in whatever mission you have. There's other things where you can get involved in your community and start doing that now. And so I talk to them a lot about that, like get involved with community groups, get involved with associations that are connected to your industry. So for public relations, there's Public Relations Society of America, there's International Association of Business Communicators. I'm like, go get connected with them, because most of them are civilian, and you can start to warm up a little bit, start to build relationships, so that when you're transitioning, now you have those established relationships that you can lean into. So those are probably like the biggest things I see that I'm sharing for them, and saying, hey, it's okay. It's okay on this end. There is a way to kind of to do it, but it does feel, it does feel awkward and uncomfortable for some people as they leave.
One piece of advice that a mentor has given you that sticks out in your head to this day?
I was on a roller coaster for about a year and a half about deciding if I was going to retire or not. And there were a lot of carrots, we call them, being hung out in front of me as opportunities that I could have taken. We made some decisions as a family based on the amount of deployments and things like that. So One of the key things that stood out for me when I was calling people who had retired or left the military ahead of me a few years, one person stated to me, leave when there's applause. And it's very simple, but it's loaded in that, he said that leaving whenever everyone still wants you there and you're at that high point and you're doing extremely well within your career, can help to set you off on a positive trajectory. Whereas it reminded me of when I was a junior Marine, probably like a Lance Corporal. I was working in administration at the time, and there was this person that this Master Sergeant that would come in and out of the office. He wasn't in a senior leadership role, but he had a position, and he did really good things. But at some point, we're like, "What's going on?" And we kind of felt as if he was being laid out to pasture a bit, and that he didn't have as much
Hmm.
um, connection to things. So that's not where I wanted to be. I didn't want to be that has been or the person that's over there still contributing. And I think that leave when there's applause, there was something that urged me to realize that that's kind of where I was, and that if there wasn't anything else out there that was challenging or intellectually stimulating for me, I needed to go and spread my wings and
Hmm.
leave the military and take what this wonderful career that I've had, life, that's been had, and take that and bring that out and see how I can help my community. Yeah, and do
Hmm.
it that way.
So moving into when you did make that transition initially, and then over to as an executive at the UPS store, I guess first question is, did you see yourself as an executive as you were leaving the military? Is that something that you had envisioned and planned out ahead of time?
No, not at all. So I pretty much had hit like this plateau in public relations. I've also been very fortunate to get a master's degree at San Diego State through the military in communication. I've done research, published research, all these things that happened. So to me, I wanted a break from public relations. I actually was looking into moving into the media industry, maybe starting a media organization. Had worked on that during an MBA, and it took about 6 or 7 months. I intentionally did not want to jump in anything. I did not want to go back to work. I wanted some time to decompress, and I highly recommend, if people have that ability financially to do so, to take a little bit more time, maybe not 7 months, but take some time so that you don't feel like you're jumping right in. So
Mhm.
anyway, so that occurred. I did an Ironman. I've been doing triathlons for years. I'd never done a full Ironman, so I went and achieved that thing. And then my husband and I went on a trip to South Africa and wanted to do more travel. And we get back, and it was probably January, February 2018. And he's like, okay, you're at the gym all the time. You sound kind of cranky. He's like, you're doing your volunteer work, but he goes, maybe you need to just go get into the civilian sector. And so that's when I applied to a few positions. Also, don't be surprised if you're super picky about where you want to work and what you want to do, because that was something that happened for me. I was almost as, I was looking at the mission of the organization, making sure I was aligned with it, and making sure that I could go in and fully support them in the right way. So I applied to a couple of colleges, and then this position for the UPS store came up, probably the fifth or sixth job that I applied for. And then it was boom, 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 3 or 4 interviews, and then I was offered a job.
Mhm.
So that was my first and only interview process after leaving the military. And good, bad, or ugly of it, it was, I went through that. Was coached by my husband and other mentors that I had to help me think through it. I mean, I hadn't done interviews, I joined the Marine at 17, so this was foreign to me. But moving into that position, it was amazing. I went in, I was able to hold a director role. So it was very comparable, I at least say, in seniority to what I held.
Mhm.
And I'd read tons of things. People are like, hey, you may need to take a pay cut, or you may need to move into a lower position, which I totally think people need to be ready for. But
Mhm.
I got into this spot, and I remember walking in. I had this nice office. One whole wall of the office was, clear glass to see out. And the first day I see an MV-22 Osprey flying over, And I'm like, okay, this is kind of cool. So I can
Yeah.
still kind of have that connection with the Marine Corps because we have all the military bases that have aviation stuff going on, and the Marine Corps Station Miramar is so close. So yeah, I mean, that was kind of how it happened. And I just decided to take the leap. I wasn't sure if it was going to work, but I knew that I needed to go try something
Mhm.
and get that experience under my belt.
So you're instrumental in Homemade San Diego and Cause San Diego. So first question I have on that is, what was the inspiration for those two nonprofits?
When I was on terminal leave in 2017, I had some extra time on my hands and I wanted to go explore doing more volunteer nonprofit work. It's been a part of my pretty much passion throughout my whole adulthood. But I volunteered with a nonprofit called National Veterans Transition Services Incorporated here in San Diego. They have a 3-week reboot program. So I went in, did video interviews with some of their it was an all-female cohort, did that. And then in addition, I was invited to provide some pro bono support to nonprofits through our local public relations society chapter. So there I am connecting with them, still on terminal. And we ended up sitting down and doing a workshop, and I had Homemade San Diego at the table. And so it went from that to me offering them some simple kind of advice having to do with how they can make better, strengthen their marketing communications and also with some of their fundraising efforts, to them inviting me in to volunteer and then becoming a board member. So
Mhm.
I highly recommend anyone out there that has the time and passion to join boards. There's a lot of leadership opportunity there for you, and you can also find a lot of connections with civilian leadership that can
Mhm.
become mentors and become just friends and associates that you connect with. So yeah, that's how I got connected with Homemade. I've been connected with them since 2017. Board president, just stepped back from that last year, so I'm past president now. And I've helped them in so many different ways. I've helped them develop a brand new workforce development program. We work with Lennar San Diego. Lennar Foundation gives us seed funding. I've helped them to train over, I think we're almost at 50 students now over 2 years, getting half of them into full-time paid jobs in the construction industry. I go in as a volunteer uh, facilitator and then helping them with their career exploration. And then we bring in the experts to teach them construction skills. So it's just been amazing to be able to kind of layering my education background, bring in my love of helping others. And we're talking about people who are former incarcerated, former foster youth, coming out of homelessness. We had one gentleman who was living in his truck that came into our course, and we were able to kind of get him to build his confidence and seeing how he could move from that into shelter, into stable, housing. So,
Mhm.
yeah, so that's kind of how Homemade happened. And then we didn't talk about it, but Navy Marine Corps Proud Foundation, they
Mhm.
pulled me in. They pulled me in 2021, and they're a very kind of newer nonprofit, and all they do is they help military families and veterans who are in financial crisis.
Mhm.
So we were 100% volunteer nonprofit. We don't have any paid staff. So our volunteers are military spouses who have retired military members, and then I'm
Mhm.
an active duty retiree that's on the board. So we do a lot of fundraising, have some fun with that, and then we just give out grants and we give out emergency aid.
So, Stacy, you've got so much experience between military service, working with industry, working with nonprofits. Are there any common threads that tie all of them together? And are there any biggest surprises or challenges at any of those stages that stick out to you?
If I were to say into the first civilian position, I think the biggest transition was um, it wasn't hard for me to acclimatize and to learn things the way that they do things, because obviously we're doing things differently in the military. But I think the biggest piece for me was to find deep purpose in the work, that it made a difference. Sometimes I didn't feel as if the work I was doing hit that dial as much as it did when I was on active duty. So that was something that I've had to, even to this day, deal with. And I think what happened for me is that when I started at the UPS store in 2018, I was already doing my homemade San Diego board leadership, and I was connected with some other nonprofits. So I kind of felt like that helped to round out my purpose.
Hmm.
So even if maybe I felt that the work I was doing comparative to the military side just wasn't cutting it, and I'm like, oh, I don't know if this is enough for me, then the volunteer philanthropy side helped to round that out so that I felt like I was kind of doing enough
Yeah.
to give back. Yeah.
If there's something you came here today that you really wanted to speak on that I didn't ask you about today,
Yeah.
what would that be?
Since all of my volunteer experiences happened after I left the military, I've been very fortunate to be connected with the San Diego Cause Conference, which has been around now for 25 years. We just had our conference in September here in San Diego. Last year, I was a volunteer of the conference. This year, I was a co-lead. I'm now the co-executive director for that conference and a new emerging initiative called Cause San Diego. So what I'd urge everyone to do, and you can look up Cause San Diego and see what we're doing. We're working as hard as we can to help businesses move beyond profit so that they can do more for their company culture, which I talked about, feeling that connectedness, helping their employees feel more purposeful, engaged, and also just throughout their value chain, making sure that they're doing the best that they can, and also leaning towards sustainability in the work that they do. So there's plenty of companies out there that have the opportunity to do these things, and we just want to show them the way, connect them to the nonprofits, to the government side, and to education to see how they can all work together. We believe that together we can do more than any of us alone. So I encourage anybody out there to go and take a look at this emerging Cause San Diego piece that we have. And if you're here locally or want to figure out a way to kind of take it and maybe do it somewhere where you live, we'd love to talk to you about that, because we think that there's real power in us coming together.
Well, Staci, thank you again so much for coming on today. I really appreciate your time and answering all of these questions. This is VCEO Magazine, where veterans lead the way.